Hi guys, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're gonna uncover a question that's been haunting mankind for almost 100 years. Is it really possible to hate a Ferrari? Stick around and let's find out. To find out if it's really possible to hate a Ferrari, we're gonna go through different things about the car that you could possibly hate or you can love it. The first thing we're gonna talk about is the obvious, it's the price. Let's face it, there are expensive Ferraris and there are less expensive Ferraris. The expensive Ferraris are of course the new ones or the ones that are numbered. This would be one of the less expensive Ferraris. This is a 360 and I guess you can get it for around 60,000 euros here in Europe. So the question is, do you love that or do you hate that? Well, if you want a Ferrari, you're gonna have to pay the price. Ferrari is perhaps one of the most exclusive cars in the world, so yeah, you have to pay for it, and if it's too expensive for you, well, go buy something else. One thing that you could hate about a Ferrari is the maintenance. On a 360 like this, an annual service would cost you around 1,000 euros. But if you have a big service and you have something broken like the clutch or ECU or whatever it could be, you could end up at a price tag around 11,000 euros like I did a few years ago. So does this make me hate the Ferrari? No. It really doesn't, because expensive cars are not made of cheap parts. Just remember that. And if you want to service an expensive car, it's gonna cost you. So conclusion, can you hate it because of the maintenance? Yeah, you could, but then again, if you can't afford it, buy another car. Now we've moved inside the car to check out the gearbox. There are different settings, and the first one is wet track, there's auto, there's manual, and there's manual sport. So let's take off and see what they're all about. Let's start inside the city limits. Inside the city limits, to be honest, I'm always using the wet track. Not because the track is necessarily wet, but it gives the car just a little more softness, and it's just a bit more easy going, and it makes it a nice car to drive. What it does is that it changes gear at 2900 RPM, but you can also overrule it if you want to here on the pedals. So this is actually a nice option. Secondly, you can go to auto, and this makes the car behave like any other automatic gearbox, but with this it's just very slow and it seems quite unintelligent. But yeah, the car is around 20 years old, and this is a technology that was available at that time. Of course, it's also a single clutch gearbox, and you should never compare it to a modern gearbox with the double clutch. Then you can also go to manual mode, where you use the pedals up here to change. This is actually not my preferred inside the city limits, because I just like to cruise, and I don't do racing inside the city limits. But in case that you would go racing inside the city limits, you'd go manual and you'll set it in sport. Now we left the city and we're out on the open road. Out here, I don't use the wet track well unless the track is wet. I don't use the automatic because I think it's rubbish. So I go directly and use the manual. As you can hear, it's not like the fastest gear change in the world, but it's pretty okay anyway. But if you want to have fun and you want some fast gear changes and you want to race the car, you just switch on the sport mode. And this is what the sport mode does. So yeah, you can actually hear the difference. It's a lot of fun. So that brings us to a conclusion about the gearbox in the 360. There are of course many models and I can't review all of them, but for the conclusion of the gearbox in the 360, I would say that it does a pretty good job. Of course, there are a few settings that you don't really want to use, like the automatic setting, because it's just slow, unintelligent, and yeah, it's actually just rubbish. But I mean, a car that's 20 years old and you still have the option to choose the right setting for the right environment, I mean, that's some kind of a bonus. And now let's talk about the handling in an urban environment. In here, I'm just cruising by right now, and I'm actually in wet track again. And the feeling of the car is that it's kind of stiff, and the suspension is pretty tough. It's quite firm actually, but just cruising around and not being in a hurry, not racing anything, it's actually a pretty good ride. I don't know if anybody would imagine that Ferraris are made for racing within the city limits. I know I'm not doing it, but just cruising like this, having fun, enjoying the car, it's actually a pretty good ride. It takes some time to get to know the car, in especially this 360. But once you get to know the car, it's actually a pretty good ride. But let's take it outside the city limit. And now we're back in the open road to test the handling of the Ferrari. And this is just home for Ferrari. You don't want to drive it inside the city limit unless you're just there to flash your car, or yeah, perhaps when you're going for milk. But here out in the open, it is just amazing to drive. It's like the whole thing comes to life. It's easy to handle, and it takes the corners just in a fantastic way. And just to see the landscape floating by is just amazing. Like here, coming to a small town, gearing down, cruising along, slow speed, and then when you get out on the open road again, you just hit the throttle, very responsive, and you just go for it. It's just amazing to drive here in the open. I just can't imagine a better way to spend my afternoon than behind the wheel of a Ferrari. This is just great. Ferraris has always been accused of having this very, very firm ride, but it's actually not that bad. I mean, if you're driving a road like this that is well maintained, it's just a regular smooth ride. Of course, it's not like driving a Honda or anything like that, but for a Ferrari, I mean, what could you expect? I expected something more firm than this, that's for sure. Coming back from a trip like that, let's talk about fuel consumption. This 360 goes around 4 to 8 kilometers per 1 liter. Ferraris generally has a lot of horsepower and it doesn't come cheap. So this is the kind of mileage that you can expect from a Ferrari. Is it too much? Can you live with that? Well, to be honest, I really don't care. I didn't buy this car to wonder about fuel consumptions. But if you want to buy one and wonder about fuel consumption, well, it's entirely up to you. Generally, Ferraris has great exhaust sounds, but with this, the 360, the story is a bit different. You can actually be passed in the street by a 360 with a standard exhaust and barely notice that you're being passed by a Ferrari. So what do you do about that? You upgrade. And what do you upgrade it to? Well, you could go with a Capristo exhaust like this. Capristo comes in 3 stages, 1, 2 and 3, and this is the one that makes the most sound, the stage 3. You can't talk about a Ferrari without mentioning the looks. There are many different versions of Ferraris, new ones, old ones, and it's a matter of taste of what you like and what you don't like. I like many different models. The 57 Testarossa, 308, 360, F8, F12, F50, 488 and so on. But there are also some that I really don't like the looks of. That would be like the 400, the 456, the FF and actually the new Monza. But does this mean that I hate them? Not really. So that brings us to a conclusion. Can you really hate a Ferrari? Well, to be honest, it's quite up to you, but I know what I like and I just love them to bits. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up. And until next time, take care.